I found the foreclosure notice taped to my front door on a Tuesday morning in Phoenix, Arizona, and my hands wouldn't stop shaking as I read the words that made no sense. According to the document, I owed the Saguaro Hills Homeowners Association $47,000 in unpaid fees, penalties, and legal costs, and they were taking my house in 30 days unless I paid in full. The problem was simple. I had never missed a single HOA payment in the 8 years I'd lived here. My name is Henry Lawson, and I'm a software engineer who works from home. I bought this 3-bedroom ranch-style house in 2017 when the Phoenix market was still reasonable, and I'd always been meticulous about my finances. Every month, like clockwork, the HOA fee of $215 came out of my checking account automatically. I had the bank statements to prove it, so how could I possibly owe them anything, let alone enough money to lose my home? I called the HOA management company immediately. My phone pressed so hard against my ear it hurt. The receptionist transferred me 3 times before I finally got someone who claimed to know what was happening. Mr. Lawson, according to our records, you signed an agreement in March 2024 to fund a special assessment for the community pool renovation. The woman said in a bored voice that suggested she'd had this conversation 100 times before. The total cost was $52,000, and you agreed to personally guarantee the loan on behalf of the association. That's impossible, I said, pacing my living room. I never signed anything like that. I never even heard about a pool renovation. Sir, I'm looking at the document right now. It has your signature, it was notarized, and it was filed with the county. You've been making payments for several months, but you stopped in November, and now the loan company is demanding full repayment. My mind was racing. What payments? Show me the canceled checks. I want to see proof. The payments were made through a separate account that you supposedly set up. Hold on, let me pull up the details. I heard keyboard clicking. Yes, there was an account at Desert Valley Credit Union opened in your name specifically for this purpose. It made 3 payments of $800 each, then nothing. I don't have an account at Desert Valley Credit Union, I said, my voice rising. I've never even been to that bank. Someone is using my identity. Sir, that's a serious accusation. The documents we have appear to be legitimate. I suggest you contact your attorney. I hung up and immediately pulled up my credit report on my laptop. There it was, a new account I'd never opened, now showing delinquent. My credit score had dropped 130 points. My stomach twisted into knots as I scrolled through the rest of the report. Someone had been busy. There was also a credit card I'd never applied for, maxed out at $5,000. The next morning, I went straight to the Maricopa County Recorder's office downtown. The building was one of those government structures that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 80s, all beige walls and fluorescent lighting. I waited in line for 20 minutes before I could request copies of any documents filed under my name related to the HOA. The clerk, a middle-aged man with thick glasses, came back 15 minutes later with a folder. Found 3 documents, he said. The loan guarantee you mentioned, plus 2 amendments to your property deed. Amendments? I felt cold. What kind of amendments? Looks like easement agreements. One gives the HOA access to your backyard for utility maintenance, and the other allows them to place a lien on your property for unpaid assessments. He slid the papers across the counter. All signed and notarized in 2024. I looked at the signatures on each document. They were supposed to be mine, but something was off. The handwriting was close, very close, but the capital H in Henry had a loop I never made. The L in Lawson was too slanted. Someone had practiced my signature, gotten pretty good at it but not perfect. Who filed these? I asked. The clerk checked his computer. Let me see. All three were filed by Linda Hartley. She listed herself as HOA secretary. Linda. I knew exactly who that was. Linda Hartley, 52 years old, blonde hair always in the same tight bun, perpetually angry about something. She'd been the HOA secretary for as long as I could remember, and she ran the association like her personal fiefdom. I'd had a few run-ins with her over the years, nothing major. Just her citing me for leaving my trash cans out an hour too late or complaining that my front yard grass was a quarter-inch too tall. I'd always paid the small fines and moved on, not wanting trouble, but this was different. This was fraud. I took photos of every document with my phone and drove straight to the police station. The Phoenix PD building on Washington Street was busy, people coming and going constantly. I explained my situation to the officer at the front desk, a young guy who looked fresh out of the academy. So you're saying someone forged your signature? He asked, typing notes into his computer. Yes, the HOA secretary, Linda Hartley. She filed fake documents using my name and opened accounts I never authorized. And you have proof the signature isn't yours. I have my real signature on file at the county recorder, at my bank, on my driver's license. Anyone can compare them and see the differences. He nodded slowly. Okay, this sounds like identity theft and forgery. Those are serious crimes. I'm going to have a detective contact you. Can you leave all your contact information? I filled out a report and left, feeling slightly better that I'd at least gotten the police involved. But I knew from experience that these things took time, and I didn't have time. The foreclosure was moving forward in 30 days. That afternoon, I hired an attorney. His name was Marcus Chen, and he came highly recommended by a friend who'd gone through a property dispute a few years back. His office was in Scottsdale, in one of those sleek glass buildings that screamed expensive. Marcus was in his 40s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. He listened to my whole story without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. This is fraud, identity theft, and forgery, he said when I finished. Potentially federal crimes if she used the mail or electronic communications to facilitate it, which she almost certainly did. The documents were filed electronically, right? Yes, according to the clerk. Then we've got wire fraud too. The FBI would be interested in this. He leaned back in his chair. But here's the problem. Stopping the foreclosure is going to require immediate action. We need to file an emergency motion with the court, get a temporary restraining order, and launch a full investigation. This isn't cheap. How much are we talking? My retainer for something like this is $10,000, and that's just to get started. If this goes to trial, you're looking at $50,000 to $100,000, potentially more. I felt sick. I had savings, but not that much. What if I can prove the signatures are forged quickly? Would that speed things up? It would help, but you'd need an expert witness, a forensic document examiner. I know a good one, Janet Rodriguez. She's testified in federal court dozens of times. Her analysis would cost about $3,000. I authorized him to proceed. I had no choice. Over the next week, Marcus filed an emergency motion to stop the foreclosure, and I sent all the documents to Janet Rodriguez for analysis. Meanwhile, I started doing my own investigation. I went to Desert Valley Credit Union, the bank where the fake account had been opened. The branch was in Temp, a small building tucked into a strip mall. I spoke with the manager, a woman named Patricia who seemed genuinely concerned when I explained the situation. I'd like to help, but I can't give you information about an account without proper authorization, she said. Even if you claim it's fraudulent, there are privacy laws. Can you at least tell me when it was opened and who opened it? She hesitated. I can tell you that if the account was opened fraudulently, you should file a police report and have them subpoena our records. We'll cooperate fully with law enforcement. I already filed a report. Then the detective will contact us. In the meantime, I can freeze the account if you sign an affidavit stating you didn't open it. I signed the affidavit on the spot. At least that would prevent any more damage from that account. My next stop was the HOA management company's office in Phoenix. They operated out of a nondescript building on Camelback Road, managing about 40 different HOAs across the valley. I asked to speak with whoever handled the Saguaro Hills account. They sent out a guy named Brad, maybe 30 years old, wearing a polo shirt with the company logo. He looked uncomfortable the moment I started talking. "Look, Mr. Lawson, I just processed the paperwork that the board gives me," he said, hands up defensively. "If Linda filed those documents, I assumed they were legitimate. That's her job as secretary. Did you ever verify my signature? Did you ever call me to confirm I'd agreed to personally guarantee a $52,000 loan? No, that's not standard procedure. The board has authority to make decisions about special assessments. If they said you agreed to it, I had no reason to question it. Even though it's completely insane for one homeowner to guarantee a loan for the entire community." Brad shifted in his chair. "In hindsight, yeah, it does seem unusual, but Linda said you'd volunteered because you wanted to help expedite the pool renovation. She said you were wealthy and didn't mind." She lied. "And now I want to see every communication she's had with your company about this loan, about those documents, everything. I can't just hand over internal communications. My attorney will subpoena them. You can make this easy or hard, but either way, I'm getting those records." Brad sighed. "Let me talk to my supervisor." 20 minutes later, I left with a promise that they'd preserve all documents related to my case and cooperate with any legal requests. It wasn't much, but it was progress. The detective assigned to my case finally called me that Friday. His name was Robert Kowalski, and he'd been with the Financial Crimes Unit for 12 years. We met at a coffee shop near my house, and I walked him through everything. "I've seen cases like this before," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "Usually it's family members or business partners, people with access to personal information, but an HOA secretary is a new one. Can you get the bank records? The credit union said they'd cooperate with law enforcement." "Already on it. I submitted the subpoena yesterday. We should have those records within a week." He paused. "I also want to talk to Linda Hartley, but I'd prefer to do it when I have more evidence. If we tip her off too early, she might destroy documents or flee." "You think she'll run?" "Depends on how deep this goes. If she's just stealing from you, probably not. If she's running a bigger scheme involving multiple homeowners or the HOA's funds, then maybe." That thought hadn't occurred to me. "You think there might be other victims?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." "Give me a list of all the HOA board members and anyone else who might have relevant information." I spent that weekend compiling everything I could think of. The current board consisted of Linda Hartley as secretary, a guy named Donald Reeves as president, and a woman named Margaret Chen as treasurer. There were also 4 at-large board members who rarely attended meetings. I pulled up every HOA meeting minute I could find online, going back 3 years. Something jumped out at me immediately. In January 2024, there'd been a discussion about renovating the community pool. The pool was old, built in 1998 when the neighborhood was developed, and it needed work. The initial estimate was $20,000. By March 2024, according to the minutes, The board had approved a $52,000 renovation with financing through a loan guaranteed by a community member who wished to remain anonymous. That was me, supposedly, except I'd never wished to remain anonymous because I'd never agreed to anything. I dug deeper into the meeting minutes. Linda had written them all herself as secretary, and her notes were detailed but carefully worded. She never explicitly named me as the guarantor, always keeping it vague. But in the March minutes, she noted that all required documentation had been properly executed and filed with the county. The renovation itself had started in April 2024. I remembered seeing contractors working on the pool, ripping out old tile, replacing the filtration system. It had taken about 3 months, and the pool reopened in July looking significantly better. At the time, I'd been pleased, thinking the HOA had found the budget for needed improvements. Now I realized I'd apparently paid for it without knowing. I called Donald Reeves, the HOA president. He was a retired accountant, 70 years old, who'd lived in Saguaro Hills since the neighborhood was built. He sounded confused when I explained why I was calling. "Henry, I don't understand." "You agreed to guarantee the loan. Linda showed us the paperwork." "Donald, I never agreed to anything. I never signed any paperwork. My signature was forged." There was a long silence. "That's a serious accusation." "I have proof. I've hired a forensic document examiner and I've filed a police report. Detective Kowalski with the Phoenix PD is investigating." "Good Lord. Are you certain?" "Completely certain. I need to know everything Linda told you about this loan arrangement. When did she first propose it?" "What exactly did she say?" Donald took a deep breath. "It was at a board meeting in February 2024. We were discussing the pool renovation, and the bids were coming in much higher than we'd anticipated. We didn't have enough in reserves, and nobody wanted to levy a special assessment on all the homeowners. Linda said she'd spoken with you privately, and that you'd offered to personally guarantee a loan to cover the costs. She said you wanted to help the community, and that you had the financial means." "Did that seem strange to you?" "At the time, no. Linda said you were very enthusiastic about it and that you'd already been in contact with a lender. She handled all the paperwork herself. She said it would be simpler that way, less bureaucracy for the rest of us to deal with." "And none of you verified this with me directly?" Another pause. "No, I suppose we should have, but Linda was insistent that you wanted to keep it quiet. She said you didn't want other homeowners bothering you or expecting you to fund other projects. That made sense to me." It made sense because Linda had crafted a believable story, one that explained away why nobody should contact me directly. She'd manipulated the entire board. "Donald, I need you to preserve every email, every document, every communication you've had with Linda about this. The police will want to see it. Of course. Henry, I'm so sorry. If I'd known, it's not your fault. Linda deceived all of us." After hanging up, I called Margaret Chen, the treasurer. She was a pharmaceutical sales rep in her mid-40s, always traveling for work. She seemed even more shocked than Donald. "I trusted Linda completely," Margaret said, her voice shaking. "She handled so much of the day-to-day paperwork. I just reviewed the financials she gave me and made sure the numbers added up." "Did the numbers add up?" "They seemed to. The loan payments were being made on schedule from a separate account. I didn't manage that account myself. Linda said you were handling it. Show me the financial records, all of them. I'll email them to you right now." The records arrived in my inbox 10 minutes later. I opened the spreadsheet and started going through line by line. The HOA's main operating account looked normal, monthly dues coming in, routine expenses going out. But there was indeed a separate account listed under Pool Renovation Project, and it showed deposits and payments that I supposedly made. except the deposits didn't match any withdrawals from my actual accounts. I pulled up my bank statements and compared them side by side. The money was coming from somewhere, but not from me. I called Detective Kowalski. I think Linda was funding that account herself, at least initially, to make it look legitimate. That would make sense, he said. Create a paper trail showing payments being made, then stop once everyone's guard is down and blame you for the default. By the time anyone notices, you're on the hook for the full loan amount. But why? What does she gain? Could be several things. Maybe she embezzled money from the HOA and needed a way to cover it up. Maybe she took kickbacks from the contractors who did the pool renovation and inflated the costs. Maybe she's just vindictive and wanted to hurt you specifically. We'll figure it out. On Monday, Janet Rodriguez called with her preliminary findings. Mr. Lawson, I've completed my analysis of the signatures on the documents you provided. In my professional opinion, the signatures attributed to you are forgeries. There are multiple inconsistencies in letter formation, pen pressure, and stroke sequence that indicate someone was copying your signature rather than executing their natural handwriting. Can you testify to that in court? Absolutely. I can provide a detailed report with photographic comparisons and technical analysis. It's clear evidence of forgery. I forwarded her report to Marcus immediately. He filed an amended motion with the court, attaching Janet's analysis and requesting an emergency hearing. The judge granted us a hearing date 3 days later. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, wood-paneled and formal. Marcus and I sat at the plaintiff's table while the HOA's attorney, a stern woman named Carol Burke, sat across from us. Linda Hartley sat behind her attorney, dressed in a conservative blue suit, her expression carefully neutral. Judge Patricia Warren presided, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She'd reviewed the motions beforehand and got straight to the point. Mr. Chen, you're arguing that the loan guarantee documents are fraudulent and that the foreclosure should be halted. Miss Burke, you're defending the HOA's position that the documents are legitimate. Let's start with the forensic evidence. Marcus presented Janet Rodriguez's report, and Janet herself testified via video conference. She walked through her analysis step by step, showing enlarged images of my real signature versus the forged ones, pointing out specific differences that were invisible to the untrained eye. In my expert opinion, these signatures were not executed by Mr. Lawson, Janet concluded. They are sophisticated forgeries, but forgeries nonetheless. Carol Burke cross-examined her but couldn't shake her conclusions. Janet had analyzed hundreds of questioned documents in her career, and her credentials were impeccable. Your Honor, Marcus said, we also have evidence that Mr. Lawson never opened the bank account used to make the loan payments, that his credit report was fraudulently modified, and that he was never present when these documents were supposedly notarized. We ask the court to immediately halt the foreclosure proceedings and order a full investigation. Judge Warren turned to Carol Burke. Miss Burke, how do you respond to this evidence? Carol looked uncomfortable. Your Honor, my client believed these documents to be authentic. If there was fraud, the HOA was also victimized. We don't object to a stay of the foreclosure pending further investigation, but we maintain that the HOA acted in good faith. The HOA's secretary filed these documents, Marcus shot back. She had motive, opportunity, and access to Mr. Lawson's personal information. This wasn't some random identity thief. This was an inside job. Judge Warren held up her hand. I've heard enough. The forensic evidence is compelling, and there are serious questions about the legitimacy of these documents. I'm granting the emergency stay. The foreclosure is halted pending resolution of the criminal investigation. Miss Burke, I suggest your client cooperate fully with law enforcement." I felt a wave of relief so strong I had to steady myself against the table. I still had my house, at least for now. As we left the courtroom, Linda Hartley tried to slip past us quickly, but I stepped in front of her. "Why?" I asked. "Why did you do this to me?" She looked me dead in the eye, and for a moment I thought she might actually answer. Instead, she said, "You'll never prove anything," and walked away. Detective Kowalski was waiting for us outside. "We got the bank records," he said. "Desert Valley Credit Union provided everything." The account was opened in person with fake identification, but they have security camera footage. "You want to guess who's on that video, Linda?" Bingo. She was wearing a disguise, but facial recognition software matched her with 97% certainty. She also used a fake email address to communicate with the bank, and we traced the IP address to her home computer. "That's enough to arrest her, right? It's enough to get a warrant. We're executing it this afternoon." He checked his watch. "In fact, my colleagues are probably at her house right now." I wanted to be there to see it, but Kowalski said that wasn't possible. Instead, Marcus and I went back to his office and waited for updates. 2 hours later, Kowalski called. "We found everything," he said, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "She kept meticulous records, which is both smart and incredibly stupid. She had copies of all the forged documents, the fake IDs she used, even a practice sheet where she'd been copying your signature over and over. It's a prosecutor's dream. What happens now? She's being booked on multiple charges: forgery, identity theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The DA is also looking at whether to charge her with attempted theft and extortion. She's looking at serious prison time, potentially 20 years if convicted on all counts. What about the money? The loan is real and someone has to pay it. That's a civil matter now. The HOA took out the loan, not you, regardless of what the forged documents say. They're responsible for it. You might want to sue them for damages, but you're off the hook for the debt itself." Marcus confirmed this. "The HOA will have to figure out how to pay back that loan, probably through a special assessment on all homeowners or by dipping into reserves. That's not your problem anymore. But you should definitely file a civil suit against Linda personally and potentially against the HOA for negligence in supervising her." Over the next few weeks, more information came to light. Detective Kowalski discovered that I wasn't Linda's only victim. She'd been embezzling from the HOA for at least 3 years, taking small amounts here and there that added up to about $30,000. When the annual audit started getting close, she'd panicked and concocted the pool renovation scheme as a way to muddy the waters and create a scapegoat. The pool renovation itself was legitimate, but overpriced. Linda had taken kickbacks from the contractor, inflating the $52,000 cost by about $15,000. She'd pocketed that money and used some of it to make the first few loan payments from the fake account, establishing the paper trail that made it look like I was involved. Her plan had been to let the loan default, blame me for the debt, and let the foreclosure proceed. Once my house was sold to cover the debt, the HOA would technically be made whole, and her embezzlement would be buried under layers of confusion and litigation. She'd probably assumed I'd either pay the debt to avoid losing my house or be ruined fighting it. What she hadn't counted on was me having the resources and determination to fight back, and her own compulsion to keep detailed records of her crimes. The forensic accountants the DA brought in discovered even more irregularities. Linda had been submitting fake invoices for maintenance work that was never done, paying herself through shell companies she'd set up. She'd been stealing from the HOA in various ways for years, and the total amount exceeded $100,000. Donald Reeves resigned as HOA president, devastated that he'd been deceived so thoroughly. Margaret Chen stayed on as treasurer but hired an independent auditor to review everything. The rest of the board was replaced in an emergency election where I, ironically, was elected president, despite having no desire for the position. Linda Hartley's trial was scheduled for September 2025. Her attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the DA wasn't interested. The evidence was overwhelming, and they wanted to send a message about HOA fraud, which was apparently becoming more common across Arizona. I attended every day of the trial. It lasted 2 weeks, with prosecutors presenting a mountain of evidence: the forged documents, the security camera footage from the bank, the fake email accounts, the practice signature sheets, the embezzlement records, testimony from handwriting experts, and statements from me and multiple HOA board members. Linda's defense was weak. Her attorney tried to argue that she'd been under stress, that she'd made poor decisions but hadn't intended to permanently deprive anyone of property. The jury didn't buy it. After 4 hours of deliberation, they found her guilty on all counts. 15 felony charges in total. The sentencing hearing was in October. The judge took into account Linda's lack of prior criminal history, but also noted the sophisticated nature of her fraud and the extensive harm she'd caused. "You held a position of trust in your community," Judge Warren said, "and you betrayed that trust in the most egregious manner possible. You forged documents, stole money, and attempted to destroy a man's life to cover your crimes." Linda received 12 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 8 years. She was also ordered to pay restitution of $147,000, covering the embezzled funds, my legal costs, and damages for the harm to my credit and reputation. The civil lawsuit I filed against her was essentially a formality after the criminal conviction. I was awarded a judgment, though I knew I'd probably never see most of that money. Her assets were seized to cover restitution, including her house in Saguaro Hills, which was sold at auction. The HOA itself faced consequences too. Several homeowners, myself included, sued the association for negligent oversight. We argued that the board should have had better financial controls in place and should have verified Linda's claims before allowing her to file documents on behalf of homeowners. That case settled out of court, with the HOA's insurance company paying damages to avoid a trial. The pool renovation loan was restructured, and all homeowners ended up paying a special assessment of about $800 each to cover it. Nobody was happy about it, but it was better than the alternative of the HOA going bankrupt and all our property values tanking. As for me, I spent months repairing the damage to my credit and my finances. The fraudulent accounts were closed and removed from my credit report, but the process was tedious and frustrating. Every credit bureau required different documentation, and I had to dispute each item multiple times before they finally corrected their records. I also discovered that Linda had used my personal information to open 2 other credit cards I hadn't known about. Both maxed out with a combined total of $11,000 in charges. Those debts were eventually written off after I proved they were fraudulent, but it took almost a year of persistent follow-up. The experience changed how I viewed everything. I'd always been trusting, assuming people were generally honest unless proven otherwise. Now I was suspicious of everything, always reading the fine print, always verifying information. It was exhausting but necessary. The Saguaro Hills HOA implemented new policies after the scandal. All financial transactions above $500 now required dual signatures. Board members had to undergo background checks. An independent auditor reviewed the books quarterly. Meeting minutes had to be approved by the full board, not just written by the secretary. And any documents filed with the county had to be verified directly with the homeowner involved, not just accepted at face value. These should have been standard practices all along, but like many HOAs, we'd been operating on trust and assumptions. Linda had exploited those weaknesses perfectly. I served as HOA president for one term, then gratefully handed the position over to a retired attorney who actually wanted the job. Running an HOA is thankless work, and I had no interest in continuing beyond what was necessary to clean up the mess Linda had created. The FBI got involved eventually because the wire fraud charges triggered federal jurisdiction. An agent named Sarah Mitchell interviewed me extensively, going through every detail of the case. She said they were building a database of HOA fraud cases to identify patterns and help other communities prevent similar crimes. "You're actually lucky," Agent Mitchell told me during one of our meetings. "A lot of HOA fraud victims don't have the resources to fight back. They lose their homes, their savings, everything. You had the money to hire good attorneys and experts and you were persistent. Most people give up." That made me angry. Then what happens to them? Usually foreclosure, bankruptcy, destroyed credit. The perpetrators get away with it because nobody has the resources to prove the fraud. It's a real problem. What can be done about it? Better oversight, better laws, more education about the warning signs. HOAs handle billions of dollars nationwide, but they're often run by volunteers with no training and minimal oversight. It's a recipe for fraud. She was right. The more I learned about HOA fraud, the more I realized how common it was and how vulnerable homeowners were. There were cases of board members embezzling millions, contractors bribing HOA officials for lucrative contracts, management companies stealing from multiple associations simultaneously. And most of it went unreported or unprosecuted because victims didn't know their rights or couldn't afford to fight. I started a website documenting my experience and offering advice to other homeowners facing similar situations. It got surprisingly popular, with thousands of visitors sharing their own stories of HOA corruption and abuse. Some were far worse than mine, involving physical intimidation, forged foreclosure documents, and HOAs that had been completely taken over by criminals. A state representative contacted me in early 2026, asking if I'd be willing to testify in support of new legislation to regulate HOAs more strictly. The proposed law would require HOAs to carry mandatory fidelity insurance, undergo annual independent audits, and file financial reports with the state. Board members would have to complete training on fiduciary duties and legal responsibilities. I testified at the state capitol in February 2026, telling my story to a committee of legislators. Several other HOA fraud victims testified too, and the cumulative impact was powerful. The legislators seemed genuinely shocked at the extent of the problem. How is this not already regulated? One representative asked. "We regulate condominiums, we regulate homeowners, but somehow HOAs operate with almost no oversight." "That's exactly right," I said. HOAs have enormous power over people's homes and lives, but in Arizona, there's virtually no state oversight. It's all handled at the county level, and counties don't have the resources or expertise to catch sophisticated fraud. The legislation passed in March 2026 with bipartisan support. Governor Katie Hobbs signed it into law in April, and it would take effect in January 2027. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, and I felt like something positive had come out of my nightmare. Linda Hartley is currently serving her sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Phoenix. I haven't communicated with her since the trial, and I have no desire to. Some people suggested I should try to understand her motivations or forgive her, but I'm not interested in either. She made calculated choices to steal and lie and try to destroy my life to cover her crimes. Understanding why doesn't change what she did. The restitution payments trickle in occasionally, small amounts garnished from whatever prison job she has. I'll probably receive a few $1,000s over the next decade, a tiny fraction of what I'm owed. The rest is gone, spent on whatever she spent it on. The prosecutors never did figure out where all the embezzled money went. She claimed she'd lost it gambling, but they suspected she'd hidden it somewhere, maybe in cryptocurrency or offshore accounts. If so, she took that secret to prison with her. My house is still here, still mine, worth more now than when I bought it despite everything. The Saguaro Hills neighborhood recovered from the scandal, though people talk about it occasionally when new residents move in. That's the guy who caught the crooked HOA secretary, they'll say, and I'll nod and smile and try not to think about it too much. The pool looks nice, at least. That's the irony of the whole thing. Linda's scheme did result in a renovated pool that the whole community enjoys. On summer evenings, I'll walk past and see families swimming, kids playing, people relaxing. They have no idea what it cost or how it happened. It's just a nice pool in their neighborhood. I'm more careful now about everything. I check my credit report monthly. I verify every document before signing anything. I read every HOA communication thoroughly, looking for irregularities. I keep detailed financial records and reconcile them regularly. It's tedious, but it's necessary, because I know firsthand how easy it is for someone in a position of trust to abuse that trust. The detective, Robert Kowalski, retired in late 2025. Before he left, he stopped by my house to say goodbye. "Your case was one of the most satisfying of my career," he said. "Not because it was complicated or high profile, but because we actually got justice. The bad guy went to prison, the victim kept his house, and maybe we prevented future crimes through better laws. That's a win." "Thanks for believing me," I said. "When I first came to the police station, I wasn't sure anyone would take it seriously. Financial crimes are always taken seriously, even if they don't seem as dramatic as violent crimes. Someone forged your signature and tried to steal your house. That's as serious as it gets in my book." We shook hands and he left. Good cops are rare, and I was grateful to have had one on my side. Marcus Chen sent me a final bill in December 2025, after all the litigation was complete. The total was $73,000, much of which would eventually be reimbursed through the restitution order and the settlement with the HOA's insurance company. But in the meantime, I had to pay it, which wiped out most of my savings. Was it worth it? Marcus asked when we met to close out the case. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "If I hadn't fought, I'd have lost my house and been bankrupt. Linda would have gotten away with it, and she'd probably be doing the same thing to someone else right now. It was worth every penny and every sleepless night." "You're tougher than you look," he said with a slight grin. "Most people would have folded under the pressure. Maybe. Or maybe I just had enough resources and support to fight effectively." I thought about what Agent Mitchell had said, about the victims who couldn't afford to fight back, and I felt guilty for being lucky enough to have savings and good credit, and the ability to hire expert attorneys. The website I created continues to grow. I updated occasionally with news about HOA fraud cases around the country, and I answer emails from homeowners asking for advice. I'm not an attorney, so I can't give legal advice, but I can point people toward resources and tell them what worked for me. Some of the stories I hear are heartbreaking. Elderly couples losing their homes to fraudulent foreclosures, veterans being harassed by power-hungry board members, families bankrupted by surprise special assessments that turn out to be embezzlement schemes. The common thread is always the same: someone in a position of trust abusing that trust for personal gain. I've become something of an advocate for HOA reform, though I never intended to. I just wanted to keep my house and see justice done. But the experience radicalized me in a way. I'd been comfortable and complacent, assuming the system worked and that people in authority positions were generally honest. Now I know better. The Saguaro Hills HOA is running smoothly now, 2 years after Linda's arrest. The new board is competent and honest, and the financial controls we implemented seem to be working. We haven't had any major issues, just the normal stuff like maintaining common areas and enforcing reasonable rules. I still get nervous every time I see an envelope from the HOA, though. There's a part of my brain that expects another foreclosure notice or some new accusation. It takes conscious effort to remind myself that Linda is in prison and can't hurt me anymore. Therapy helped with that. I started seeing a counselor in late 2024 after the trial because I was having trouble sleeping and kept having anxiety attacks. She diagnosed me with PTSD, which seemed dramatic for something that was just financial fraud. But she explained that trauma comes from feeling powerless and violated, and that's exactly what I'd experienced. You had your identity stolen, your signature forged, your property threatened, she said. Someone you thought was a minor nuisance turned out to be actively trying to destroy your life. That's traumatic, and it's okay to acknowledge that. The therapy helped me process everything and develop better coping mechanisms. I still have bad days, but they're getting less frequent. Time helps and distance helps, and knowing that Linda is facing consequences helps most of all. I ran into Margaret Chen at the grocery store a few months ago. We chatted briefly about HOA business, and then she apologized again for not catching Linda's fraud earlier. You couldn't have known, I told her. She was good at what she did. She fooled everyone. I should have been more diligent. I was too trusting. We all were. That's not a character flaw. We shouldn't have to assume our neighbors are criminals. She nodded but still looked guilty. I understood. When someone violates trust on that scale, everyone involved feels complicit somehow, even when they're victims too. The house next to Linda's old place sold recently to a young family from California. They're nice people, and I hope they never learn about the history. The neighborhood doesn't need that hanging over it forever. I got a letter from the Federal Bureau of Prisons in January 2026, informing me that Linda was appealing her conviction. The appeal was ultimately denied, but it reminded me that even with her in prison, the case wasn't completely over. There would always be some lingering thread, some piece of paperwork, some reminder. The credit card companies finally removed all the fraudulent accounts from my credit report in February 2026, almost 2 years after they were opened. My credit score recovered fully, actually ending up higher than before because of all the documentation I'd provided proving the fraud. Small victories. I'm dating someone now, a woman named Rachel who works as a nurse at Mayo Clinic. I told her the whole story on our 3rd date because I didn't want it to be a secret or a surprise. She listened carefully and then said, "That's awful, but you handled it incredibly well." I don't know about that. I just did what I had to do. That's what handling things well means. You could have given up or let it destroy you. Instead, you fought back and won. I appreciate her perspective, though I don't always feel like I won. I kept my house, but I lost 2 years of my life to stress and litigation and fear. I spent $73,000 defending myself against crimes I didn't commit. I still have moments of rage when I think about Linda sitting in her HOA meetings, smiling and taking notes, knowing she was actively destroying my financial life. But Rachel is right that I did what had to be done, and that counts for something. The alternative would have been worse. The pool renovation loan was finally paid off in March 2026, about a year ahead of schedule because several homeowners, myself included, made extra payments to get it over with. There was a small celebration at the annual HOA meeting, which felt both appropriate and absurd. We were celebrating being free of a debt we shouldn't have had in the first place. I'm writing this in late February 2026, sitting in my home office, looking out at the Arizona sunset. The sky is orange and purple, and the desert landscape looks beautiful in the fading light. This house, this place, almost wasn't mine. Someone tried to take it through fraud and deception, and for a while it looked like they might succeed, but they didn't. Linda Hartley promised me it was legal, promised the HOA board she had proper documentation, promised everyone that everything was legitimate. She was lying about all of it, forging signatures and creating fake accounts, and building an elaborate house of cards that eventually collapsed under its own weight. The federal investigators proved it. The forensic document examiners proved it. The bank records and security camera footage and her own incriminating documents proved it. And now she's in prison, and I'm still here in my house, living my life. The story ends there, mostly. There's no dramatic final confrontation, no moment of catharsis where everything is resolved. Just the slow, grinding process of justice, paperwork filed and reviewed, evidence presented and examined, a jury deliberating and reaching a verdict, a judge imposing a sentence. The system worked eventually, though it required enormous effort and expense to make it work. I think about Linda sometimes, wondering what she's thinking in her prison cell. Does she regret it? Does she understand why what she did was wrong? Or does she still think she was justified somehow, that I deserved it for some imagined slight? I'll never know, and I suppose it doesn't matter. She made her choices, and I made mine. She chose fraud and forgery. I chose to fight back. Her choices led to prison. Mine led to keeping my home and helping change laws to protect other homeowners. If there's a lesson in all this, it's that trust has to be earned and verified. Linda had a title, HOA secretary, that came with implied trust. But titles don't mean anything without accountability. The new HOA rules we implemented, the state legislation that passed, the training requirements and audits and oversight, those aren't about distrust. They're about appropriate accountability for people handling other people's money and property rights. The sun has set now, and the desert sky is dark. Inside my house, the lights are on, warm and welcoming. This is my home, and it remains my home because I refuse to let someone take it through lies. That's the whole story. The HOA secretary forged my signature, promised everyone it was legal, and federal investigators proved it was fraud. She went to prison. I kept my house, and the system has slightly better protections now than it did before. Not a perfect ending, but a real one, and real is all any of us can hope for.